everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my January and February wrap up of all the books that I've read in those months. I think I've got a total of 8 books, which is pretty much my standard reading speed at the minute. 4 books a month, 1 book a week, and then it sort of fluctuates around that. I feel like I'm being really prepared this month because I'm currently filming this on the 24th of February because I don't think I'm going to finish any more books until March, and hopefully this one will be up early March, fingers crossed. But yeah, let's just get straight on into the books, shall we? So the first book that I read in 2023 was The Snowman by Jo Nesbø. This is a Norwegian detective thriller. It's actually the 7th book in the Harry Hole series. I'd heard that you don't really need to read the previous books in order to understand this, and I would agree with that. In fact, most fans of this series recommend that you start on book 3 anyway, because apparently the first 2 aren't very good. So I've had this on my shelf for literally years now, and I really wanted to read it during winter, so I finally picked it up and I did enjoy it. I read it surprisingly quick considering this book is like well over 500 pages long. I was able to read quite big chunks of it all in one go because I was really invested in the story. We're basically following Harry Hole as he's investigating this potential serial killer who targets mothers, and with every kill that he does he leaves behind a snowman. I liked Harry Hole as a character. He's struggling with alcoholism in this book, so you're kind of alongside him as he's trying to recover. My only struggle with this book was that a lot of the names were, I'm guessing, Norwegian, so I had to make a little list of who everyone was and what job role they did, because that could be a little confusing for me who's never heard of a lot of Norwegian names before. And I also found that I was struggling to keep up with the story. I had to flick back and forth a couple of times because there'd be parts where it'd say, oh, this person, you need to do this, but like a few lines before they'd left the room, and I just couldn't really get my head around that. And that happened a number of times, so I don't know if it was the translation or whatever, but there were a few names and things which came up again and again that I'd forgotten who they were and like what their relevance was. But that probably wasn't helped by the fact that this is the 7th book and you probably are meant to know who a lot of these people are at this point. So I suppose just be wary of that if you do read this and you've not read the previous books. I did guess the killer earlier than I was hoping to, and I wasn't really a fan of how that reveal came to us, and I thought after the reveal it gets a little bit like action movie. There's a lot of like very intense action scenes where Harry Hole is like our hero. I feel like it just went on a little bit too long, but overall I enjoyed it. It definitely hooked me in very quickly, so I'm giving this 3 out of 5 stars because I liked it, but it's probably not going to be one that I remember for very long. The next book that I read was also a thriller, and that was All Her Fault by Andrea Mara. I've got quite a few thrillers downstairs, like domestic thrillers, on my TBR shelf, and I really wanted to get through some of them, so I picked this one up. This book basically centres around this little boy's disappearance, and we're following from the perspectives of I think 4 different women who are somehow connected to this disappearance and unravelling the mystery of what happened to him. This is more of a slow burn domestic mystery. There are definitely twists and turns, especially towards the end, but for the most part this is a lot about the women's lives and the sort of mummy issues that they have. There's a lot of like schoolgate drama and wanting your kids to have the best group of friends and that sort of thing, which I found quite enjoyable actually. I really liked the audiobook as well. I read like half of it physically and then half with the audiobook, and the audiobook narrator's voice was so nice. She had this amazing Irish accent. This book is set in Ireland, by the way. It felt really well written. I liked the characters, especially this one perspective was quite funny. It was the mother of one of the suspects of this disappearance. The way that she tries to cash in on this attention is so funny. So I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5 stars overall. I really enjoyed it. It's not a new favourite, but I would definitely recommend it. The next book that I read was actually a buddy read with my friend, and that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm not much of a classics reader. I think I tried to read Jane Eyre and I DNF'd it at like 60%. I just couldn't get into it at all. The only 2 classics that I've said that I want to read are Frankenstein, which I've now read, and Wuthering Heights, but I'd never read anything as old as this book before, I don't think. So this book is over 200 years old now, and it definitely stands the test of time. It doesn't read that old at all. It's very accessible, I would say, for a classic. It was definitely a slower read for me because I really wanted to savour every word, understand exactly what was going on. But I read this on my Kindle, and the copy that I had a lot of footnotes in there, so it explained what some of the older words meant, and also explained a lot of the influences and why certain lines were in there, and bits about Mary Shelley's life, which I found really interesting actually. To say that this girl wrote this book when she was like 18 years old is just insane. it reads so intelligent and it goes so in depth into a lot of different themes. If you don't know what the plot of this book is, like I didn't, then it's basically following this scientist called Frankenstein who creates this monster. I always thought that the monster was called Frankenstein, but apparently it's not. Frankenstein is the scientist and it's Frankenstein's monster who is kind of unnamed. Frankenstein is absolutely appalled with what he's made and he basically abandons him, and this monster goes off to live his own life. And throughout the book, Frankenstein and his monster come into contact a few times. He feels very burdened with having the responsibility of this monster and all the actions that he does, and whether that is Frankenstein's fault or not. It also talks a lot about nature and the natural world, which I really love in books. This book is mainly set in Switzerland and near the mountains, so that's really beautiful. And then there's a bit where he takes a trip to England, and this book has convinced me that I need to do like an English road trip, because the way that she described their trip from like down south right through London all the way up to Scotland just sounded amazing. So who knows, maybe I'll just take a year out and do a fat road trip at some point. A year in England, I don't know, you probably wouldn't need a full year, would you? It's tiny. Either way, it sounded so nice. And some of my favourite bits were when Frankenstein and the monster were together and they were having these debates about why the monster was the way he was, whose responsibility is it, whose fault is it, can he be fixed, should he be fixed, all of that. I have quite a lot of things highlighted in my Kindle, so I do want to buy this book at some point, like a second-hand copy, and transfer it all into that. I'm going to give this book 4 out of 5 stars, just because it doesn't feel like a new favourite. It doesn't quite feel like a 5-star, because it was still a bit of a struggle to read, just because of the language, I think. I think this is quite a short book, and it took me longer than I expected to finish it, which is fair enough for a classic, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a 5-star, so I'm going to settle on a 4, even though I would highly recommend this. If you want to start getting into classics, then I think this is a really good one to start with. It just reminded me of being an English literature student again. I studied it a bit at AS level, I think, and at school, but just reading all the footnotes, doing all my highlighting and annotating in my Kindle, I just felt very studious. I'm yet to have my little discussion with my friend about it, even though we finished it ages ago, because the day that we were meant to have it, we'd not finished the book. So it's now like a month later, and I think we're going to be talking about it very soon. The next book that I read was The House Guest and Other Stories by Amparo de Villa. This author is a Mexican writer, so this book is translated by Audrey Harris and Matthew Gleason. This is a short story collection of horror stories, mainly focused around feminist themes, and they all feel kind of ambiguous and creepy. I think I'm going to give this book 3.5 out of 5. My favourite stories were some of the ones in the middle: Fragments of a Diary, The Cell, and Music Concrete. Fragments of a Diary was about a woman who was studying pain, and she's putting herself through all these really painful processes in order to learn from it. The Cell, I didn't fully get it at first, but it was about this woman who has this monster in her room and she seeks marriage to try and get away from this monster. But when I read about it and fully understood what it meant, I really liked it. And then my favourite one in this collection is Music Concrete. This is about a woman who thinks she's being stalked by her boyfriend's ex, I think. I really liked reading about this platonic friendship, this like male-female friendship that is strictly just like friends, because I feel like you don't see that a lot. This guy thinks that she might be imagining it and that she might be going mad, but the woman is adamant that she's being followed and that this woman hangs outside her window at night and sounds like a frog. So very weird, but I loved the climax of this story. I loved how it ended, and it was also genuinely frightening. I liked all of the stories. There isn't one that I disliked, but I gave a lot of them individually like a 3-star rating. Like, I just thought they were okay. I think a lot of these stories were written quite a long time ago as well. It doesn't actually say when these stories were individually published that I can see. I did like the creepy, eerie feeling that I got from this book, but there were only a few that I really liked, and the rest of them I thought were just good. So I think I'm going to give it a 3.5 overall. I think I'm used to something a little bit different now, a little bit more extreme, a little bit more shocking. And these are kind of horrifying but in an understated way, but it's definitely still worth reading if this sounds interesting to you. They're all very short. I think this book is only about 100 pages long, and there's 12 stories in this collection, so they're all very short and easy to get through. So I definitely have a look at this if you're into more understated, creepy, gets under your skin kind of horror. The next book that I read was on audio, and that was The Neighbour by Fiona Cummings. I needed something just to drive to, and on my library reading list, this one just took my fancy that day. This is a domestic thriller about this family who have just moved onto the avenue, and we're following from a range of different characters that all have something to do with this avenue. A few of the other neighbours, we're following a police detective, and there's this serial killer operating in this neighbourhood who basically removes victims' eyes and puts doll eyes in them instead and leaves them looking quite well groomed. We're also getting the perspective of the killer, but obviously you don't know who it is. So there's quite a lot of characters in this book, which I think was something that I didn't love about it. Just because I was getting a bit lost with who was who. I can't remember anyone's actual names. It took me like a few minutes into each chapter to figure out who was speaking in this chapter. The writing's really good, some of it almost feels lyrical, but I didn't specifically connect with anyone and I didn't really care for any of the characters. It felt quite long as well. I think the audiobook was about 10 hours and I'm not sure it needed to be that long. I just wasn't fully in the story. I don't know why. Because it was well written. It had really beautiful writing at some points, especially from the killer's perspective, I thought. But unfortunately, I predicted who the killer was going to be and I was kind of just waiting for it to happen. Like, when are they going to tell me that this killer is this killer? I think I've given it a 3 out of 5. It was fine, but it's definitely not one that I'm thinking of buying as like a physical copy because I really love it, or that I'll instantly recommend to people. Hi everyone, so I've just been editing this video and I realised that I completely forgot to talk about one of the books that I read in February. I don't know why, because I actually really enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. But that book was Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough. As you may already know, I have a little bit of a hit or miss relationship with Sarah Pinborough. Behind Her Eyes is one of my favourite thrillers ever. I read one of her backlisted ones last year called Cross Her Heart and I really did like it. I think I gave that one 2 stars. So I wasn't really sure what to expect going into this, but yeah, I really enjoyed it overall. If you can hear any background noise, it's likely to be my cats. They're like messing about in this room. So this book is about a woman who's a divorce solicitor and she's married with 2 kids and she's approaching her 40th birthday. Now, she's absolutely terrified of reaching 40 because when she was a kid, her mum, in the build up to her being 40, suffered really badly with insomnia and really badly with mental health. So our main character is scared of like going down the same path. And then I think we start the book 10 days before her 40th birthday and she starts with this insomnia. I thought this book was actually pretty creepy. I listened to the whole thing on audio and some parts of it were genuinely scary. This isn't a horror or anything like that, it's just like a more creepy domestic thriller. It is very heavy on the domestic drama, which I like. The main character reminded me a little bit of Catherine Cawood from Happy Valley, especially because this book is set in Leeds, so the voice actor for the audiobook has this Yorkshire accent. I did suspect who was going to be involved with the reveal towards the end, but the reveal itself, I don't think you could predict it at all. I don't want to say what kind of reveal or twist it is because I feel like that'll just spoil it, but it is on a similar wavelength to Behind Her Eyes, I would say. Like if you liked that one, then you'll probably like this one. If you hated that book, then you'll probably hate this ending as well. But yeah, just know that it's definitely not one that you would predict or expect. I think Sarah Pinborough is very well known for having very bizarre endings. I had a really good time with this book. I couldn't wait to keep listening to it. I think I read it quite quickly actually. And yeah, that means I've read 3 of her books now and 2 of them have been really good. I think I've got another one downstairs called 13 Minutes and then I might just see what else she brings out. So yeah, now back to the original video. And then the last 2 books that I've read very recently are 2 from a series and I've really loved both of them. So these books are The Fifth Season and The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. These are the first 2 books in the Broken Earth trilogy. As you can see, they are beautifully tabbed. I went for a little blue scheme with this one and then we've gone for like pinks and purples here. I think it looks so cute and I am obsessed with these books, okay? My little backstory to this is that in 2020 I read these books both for the first time and for some reason I just never read the 3rd one. I think it's because I loved this one straight away. Like, this was one of my favourite books I'd ever read. And then I read The Obelisk Gate and I think I gave it a 4 out of 5. I still liked it, but I found it to be a little bit slower paced and I wasn't as excited as I was from the first book. So I think maybe that was part of why I didn't finish it, or maybe I was just scared for it to be over. There was a lot of pressure on that 3rd one being really good. Anyway, That third book has been the oldest book on my TBR for a long time, and it was doing my head in because sometimes I'll go through my TBR and I'll put it in order from like oldest to newest and pick something from the oldest bit, and that one is always at the top because I just couldn't pick up the third one after 3 years of not reading the first two. So I gave myself a little challenge that I wanted to read these two books. I've loved the whole experience. I've given both of these 5 out of 5 now. I think maybe now that I know what I was expecting with this one, it definitely made the reading experience more enjoyable. So the 5th season is about, how do I explain it because it's quite complicated. This book is a fantasy book. It's an adult fantasy, and it's set in kind of a futuristic version of Earth where a 5th season occasionally happens. So obviously we've got our normal 4 seasons, but every so often there's a 5th season where some massive catastrophe happens and it basically creates this really uninhabitable atmosphere for a number of years. Basically their whole lives are revolved around setting up a community which can protect them when these 5th seasons come. So in this book we're following 3 different perspectives. Each perspective is an origin. So an origin is somebody who can take energy and heat from the earth and transfer it into some sort of magical ability. So in this world there's a place called the Fulcrum where origins who are discovered as children are trained and kind of controlled so that they can use their magical ability for good. One of the perspectives in this book is a girl who has found out that she's an origin. She gets taken off to the Fulcrum to study how to be an origin and put that magic to good use. The second perspective is a woman who's been trained by the Fulcrum and she's in her 20s or 30s I think, and she gets sent on a mission with this guy who's like a really powerful origin. And then we're also following this third perspective of a woman in her 40s who's just discovered that her husband has just killed their son, and she suspects it's because he's realised that their son is an origin. He's also run off with their daughter, she thinks. So we've got a lot going on in this book, and it was so hard for me to explain that in a way that makes sense. But this book is spectacular. The writing style is so engaging. At the start of this book, it's kind of explaining a little bit about the society and about what a 5th season is. And it's so chatty in tone. It's almost sarcastic. It's quite funny. When there's action scenes, there's tons of like short sentences, and she uses punctuation really effectively to make it like very intense and dramatic. There's a massive range of characters in this book, and there's representation for trans people, gay people, bisexual people. There's polyamory in there. The ideal race in the society is having black skin with like big grey hair. The way that this book sort of seamlessly writes all of this in there in a way that doesn't feel forced. It just feels so natural and like this is just how the world is. The characters are amazing, like every character in this book I just love. The plot, so intense. The magic system, I just love it. I literally can't rave about this book enough. Look how bashed this copy is, like everything's sort of fallen apart. The pages are like yellow, covered in water. I'm not sure actually what I've done to this book. Like I say, I did tons of annotating and tabbing. Yeah, so I just underlined a ton of quotes that I really liked. There's also some parts where I've underlined, where I've written my own notes. And I just had the best time with this book. I knew I would love it just as much as I did the first time, but I was really surprised with how much I'd like forgotten, how all these intense scenes that I really still remember were just as intense the second time round. I just friggin' loved it. It definitely has the same impact on a reread, so this one was an easy 5-star. And then I read the second one, which I'd previously given 4 stars, and I love this one just as much as I do the 5th season now. I tabbed this one so much as well. It tackles xenophobia and the fear of otherness so well. I highly, highly, highly recommend these books if you like adult fantasy. I wouldn't even say that I'm an adult fantasy lover. The ones that I have read I've really loved, but I think I'm quite picky with it. There is like hints of romance in these books, but it's really not the focus. The main focus is on like friendship, and I'm currently reading the 3rd one. I'm actually vlogging that for a video which will be up quite soon. So that is all the books that I read in January and February. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you've been reading recently, or if you've read any of these books before. Give this video a like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!